Hospitals are sanctuaries of hope, places where compassion meets science, and lives are mended by hands sworn to heal. But sometimes, the very space built for healing becomes the stage for horror. On a quiet March night in Raleigh, North Carolina, the emergency department at UNC Rex Hospital was like any other, tired nurses pushing through their double shifts, doctors trading quick glances that said, "Hang in there," and patients clutching their pain, waiting for relief.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
But in room 312, something was about to happen, something that would leave two healthcare workers questioning not just their safety, but the very oath they lived by. The footage is grainy, blurred by time and chaos. A patient's room, dim, cluttered with 4 poles, wires, and half-empty medication trays. You can almost smell the antiseptic. Then, movement. A figure on the bed, 25-year-old Cameron Gilchrist, sits upright, his breathing uneven, his eyes darting between the nurse and the paramedic at his bedside. He wasn't just another diabetic patient that night. He was a man burdened by illness, addiction, and something much darker, a viral truth in his bloodstream that he refused to accept as fate. Cameron was HIV positive. And within minutes, that fact would become his weapon. The medical team had been tending to his diabetic crisis, carefully adjusting fluids, insulin, and monitoring his vitals. But something shifted. Maybe it was pain. Maybe rage. Maybe a deep resentment toward a world he felt had already condemned him. Suddenly, he yanked the 4-line from his arm. Blood spurted freely, a crimson thread cutting through the sterile air. The nurse gasped, reaching instinctively to stop the bleeding. But before she could react, Cameron aimed. He pointed the bleeding line toward her face, and sprayed. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was targeted. Precise. Intentional. 2 hospital workers, 1 man, 1 woman, were caught in the chaos. Both struck in the eyes by his HIV-positive blood. The room descended into panic. A doctor shouted for security. Someone slammed the emergency button. But the damage was already done. In seconds, the sanctity of that hospital dissolved into confusion and fear. The very people sworn to preserve life were suddenly fighting to protect their own. Not from a cardiac arrest or trauma wound, but from a deliberate act of biological assault. You can almost feel the terror that rippled through that small ER wing. The disbelief. The helplessness. These weren't strangers on the street, these were healers, caretakers, people who had likely comforted hundreds of patients before him. And now, their compassion had been met with cruelty. As nurses scrambled to rinse their eyes, another team rushed to restrain Gilchrist. Blood smeared across the sheets, the walls, their gloves. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was shock. The kind that hangs in the air, thick and heavy, long after the screams stop. Security arrived minutes later, but by then, the fear had already taken root. The exposure was real. The threat, life-altering. Those 2 medical professionals, whose names remain withheld for privacy, were sent for immediate decontamination and emergency antiviral treatment. Imagine the horror of not knowing, of waiting days, weeks, for test results that could rewrite your entire life. They had come to work that night expecting to save lives, not to wonder if theirs had just been taken from them. The Raleigh Police Department launched an immediate investigation. What they uncovered confirmed the unthinkable. Cameron Gilchrist had used his own blood as a weapon, his HIV-positive blood, to attack those trying to save him. According to the arrest warrant, he unlawfully, willfully, and feloniously assaulted emergency personnel, aiming directly at their faces, causing irritation and exposure to HIV. He turned his illness into ammunition. His veins into violence. Yet what's even more haunting, he wasn't arrested immediately. Gilchrist was kept under medical and psychiatric watch. The man who brought terror into a place of healing was allowed to remain there, monitored, treated, and protected. For the victims, that reality was salt in an open wound. UNC Rex Hospital released a statement days later. Carefully worded. Professionally neutral. They spoke of ongoing investigation, employee safety, and partnership with law enforcement. But beneath those phrases lay something deeper, fear. A growing epidemic not of disease, but of violence against healthcare workers. What happened that night wasn't just a medical assault, it was a betrayal of the bond between patient and healer. It was the moment every nurse's silent fear came true, that the person you're trying to save might be the one who destroys you. And as dawn broke over Raleigh, the hospital's fluorescent halls looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Behind the masks and scrubs, the staff carried a new kind of trauma. One that couldn't be seen on an X-ray or treated with antibiotics. 2 healers were left fearing for their lives, not from a disease, but from the man they were trying to save. A hospital badge, stained red, lies motionless beneath the bed. The camera lingers. The world holds its breath. Who was Cameron Gilchrist, and what really happened in room 312 that night? Cameron Gilchrist was only 25. Born and raised in Durham, North Carolina, he carried the kind of story most people never see, but always feel, the quiet weight of a life unraveling too soon. His mother worked as a nurse's aide, her hands always tired but gentle. His father? Gone before Cameron learned to spell his name right. At 13, doctors told him he was diabetic. At 19, another diagnosis, HIV positive. From that moment, the boy who once smiled through struggle began sinking into mistrust, depression, and long hospital nights that blurred into years. Recently, Cameron had been released from a halfway facility meant to stabilize his behavior. They said he was doing better, more responsive, calmer. But inside, a storm was growing. He carried 2 battles within him, one in his blood, the other in his mind. Every time he looked at his reflection, he didn't see a survivor. He saw a man fate had already written off. On that March night, fate crossed paths with 2 healers who had never met him before, Tanya Brooks and Marcus Lee. Tanya, 34, mother of 2, worked nights to save for her daughter's college tuition. Her co-workers said she had a heart too big for this world. The kind of nurse who'd pray with patients who had no one else. Marcus, 29, an ER technician with the calm of a seasoned soldier. Once an EMT, he'd seen the worst of humanity on highways and alleyways, yet he never lost his softness. He was the one who made people laugh between tragedies. They were professionals. Compassionate. Grounded. Always stepping in when others stepped back. To them, Cameron was another patient, a life worth saving. UNC Rex Hospital stood tall in Raleigh, one of North Carolina's most trusted names in medicine. A place where hope had a heartbeat, where every hallway echoed with the footsteps of the determined. Sterile, bright, always alive with movement. But that night, those same corridors would witness something no training could prepare them for. There's a strange kind of peace in hospitals before disaster. It's the quiet before the call, the pause before the cry. And inside room 312, under the cold fluorescent lights, a patient sat restless, 2 healers stood ready, and the line between care and chaos was about to disappear. March 14, 2023. Raleigh, North Carolina. It began as another ordinary night at UNC Rex Hospital, a place built on order, rhythm, and routine. But routine, as it turned out, would not survive this night. Cameron Gilchrist was admitted just after 9 p.m. His chart read, severe hypoglycemia. His blood sugar levels had dropped dangerously low. When the paramedics wheeled him in, he looked pale, drenched in sweat, and trembling. The kind of tremor that isn't just about sugar, it's about fear, anger, and something deeper you can't name. His eyes darted around the room as though he was searching for something that wasn't there. Nurses moved fast, almost mechanical in their precision. Syringes filled, 4 lines primed, glucose ready to push. To them, this was routine, a case they'd seen 100 times before. But to Cameron, every movement around him felt like a threat. His breathing came fast, uneven. When they tried to comfort him, he mumbled something under his breath. At first, they couldn't make it out. Then, clear as day, he said, "They're watching me. Don't let them stick me again." There was history in that voice. A man who'd seen too many needles, too many white walls. A man whose mind was now a maze of mistrust. Tanya Brooks walked into room 312 with her usual composure. She had been on shift since 7 p.m., already running on coffee and conviction. Her movements were calm, years of training wrapped in quiet confidence. She smiled softly as she checked the 4-line. "Hi, Cameron. My name's Tanya. We're just going to get you stable, all right?" He didn't answer. Just stared, vacant but sharp. His hands clenched the blanket like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Tanya noted his anxiety in her chart, glanced at the monitor, and tried to ease the air with small talk. "You're in good hands, okay? We'll take care of you." Moments later, Marcus Lee entered the room. He'd been called in to assist. His presence carried the quiet strength of someone used to chaos. He greeted Tanya with a nod, adjusted the glucose flow, and leaned over the patient. "Your blood sugar's low, man. We're just helping you feel better. Nothing to worry about." Cameron blinked hard, his jaw tightening. His voice was quiet but cutting, "Don't lie to me." Marcus looked up, confused. Tanya gave a gentle smile, trying to diffuse whatever was brewing. Outside, the hallway hummed with the rhythm of a normal night, nurses trading stories, someone laughing near the vending machine, the steady pulse of medical machinery echoing like background music to human fragility. But inside room 312, the air had changed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded. Cameron began to shift on the bed, restless. His breathing grew heavy, his eyes darted to the 4 in his arm. Tanya noticed and placed a hand on his wrist. "Hey, it's okay. Don't move too much. We need that line in to help you." He flinched, yanking his arm slightly. Marcus stepped closer. "Cameron, take a breath, all right? You're safe here." For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The monitors steadied. Tanya reached to adjust the 4 again. Then Cameron spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I'm not safe anywhere." Tanya and Marcus exchanged a quick glance. She made a note to alert the charge nurse about his mental state. But before she could finish writing, Cameron's hand jerked. He stared at the 4-line, eyes wide and glassy, as if realizing something dark. He looked at the needle in his arm, and for a split second, something inside him snapped. He tore it out. Blood spurted from his arm in a violent arc, splattering across the sheets. Tanya gasped, instinctively reaching to apply pressure, but Cameron moved faster, his movements wild, frantic. The tube swung from his hand like a weapon. Marcus shouted, "Cameron, stop." But the man didn't stop. He raised his arm, and in one swift, horrifying moment, he aimed his own blood toward them. Tanya stumbled back, shielding her face, but it was too late. A spray of blood hit her across the eyes. Marcus turned to help her, and another hit him square in the face. The scene turned chaotic. Nurses rushed in. Someone yelled for security. Tanya fell against the wall, gasping, trying not to touch her face. Marcus blinked furiously, panic flooding his expression. Cameron sat there, breathing hard, his own arm bleeding freely. His face was cold, almost detached. In that moment, time froze. The man they were trying to save had turned his blood into a weapon. And for the two who came to help him, life would never feel the same again. Tanya was escorted out, her eyes burning. Marcus followed, trembling. Emergency decontamination began within minutes. The hallway that once hummed with quiet care now echoed with confusion and fear. Doctors rushed in, security sealed the area, and whispers began spreading through the ward like wildfire. Cameron was restrained soon after, his arms still dripping. He didn't fight back this time. He just stared at the floor, silent. Somewhere in his expression, there was no rage left, only emptiness. No one in that hallway knew what had just begun. They didn't know if the virus had found a new host, or if they were witnessing a tragedy born from pain too long ignored. That night, Raleigh's most trusted hospital became something else. A battlefield of mercy and madness. And by morning, the headlines would tell the world. What no one in that room could ever forget. The clock read 9:47 p.m. inside room 312 at UNC Rex Hospital. Tanya Brooks stood by the patient's bed, adjusting the 4-line that had come loose. Cameron Gilchrist's breathing was fast, his eyes darting, unfocused. She leaned in slightly, her voice calm, motherly even. "Cameron, just hold still for me, okay? We'll have you feeling better soon." But something in his stare shifted. His hand twitched. The tremor that had begun in weakness now carried a strange, angry strength. Marcus Lee, standing on the other side of the bed, noticed it first, the sudden tightening of Cameron's jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the pulse of his arm beneath the skin. Tanya reached again for the 4. Cameron's hand shot upward. In one violent motion, he jerked the line free. The plastic tube tore from his arm, releasing a spray of blood that caught the sterile light in red flashes. Time seemed to slow. The droplets floated for a split second, then scattered across the white sheets, the walls, and the air between them. What happened next would haunt everyone in that room. Cameron's breathing turned ragged. His face twisted, not in pain, but in fury. He clenched the bloody 4 tube in his fist like a whip. Tanya stepped back, startled, but not yet afraid. "Cameron, please, sit down, you're bleeding." Marcus reached for the emergency call button, but he was too slow. Cameron raised his arm and swung. The blood arced through the air, a dark ribbon cutting across the fluorescent glow. Tanya turned her face instinctively, but it struck her, warm, metallic, blinding. She gasped, dropping the clipboard as her hands flew to her eyes.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
Marcus lunged forward to help her, shouting, "Tanya! Get back!" But before he could shield her, another spray hit him square across the face. Then came the sound no one forgets, the raw, human sound of fear. Tanya stumbled backward, trying not to touch her eyes, her voice trembling, "My face, Marcus, I can't see." Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes, blinking furiously, his body shaking. The blood burned. His breath came short, uneven. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Even the machines seemed to hesitate. And then, chaos. Nurses rushed in, followed by security officers. The once quiet corridor exploded into noise, shouted commands, the metallic slam of doors, the echo of shoes on linoleum. Cameron sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the chaos he had unleashed. Blood streamed from his arm, pooling on the floor, but he didn't flinch. His expression was distant, detached, almost numb. A nurse tried to approach, voice steady but urgent. "Cameron, put it down. Let us help you." He didn't move. Just stared at the 4 tubing in his hand, now slick and red, as if it were the last thing tying him to control. Security shouted again. "Sir! Drop it now." But there was nothing left to drop. The damage had already been done. Tanya was escorted out, tears streaming, her uniform soaked in blood. She kept asking the same question over and over, "Is it in my eyes? Did it get in?" Her voice cracked between panic and disbelief. Marcus, disoriented, stumbled into the hallway. He pressed a towel to his face, trembling. His knees buckled as the paramedics grabbed him before he hit the floor. Inside the room, the scent of disinfectant mixed with the thick iron smell of blood. The floor glistened under the light. A hospital built to save lives now looked like the aftermath of a crime scene. A staff member whispered, he knew what he was doing. He aimed right for them. Security restrained Cameron without a fight. He barely resisted, his breathing slow, his eyes hollow. One officer asked if he understood what he'd done. Cameron didn't answer. He just muttered, "They keep taking from me. They keep taking." In his mind, he was the victim. But to everyone else in that building, he had become something else, a man who turned his own body into a weapon. In the emergency decontamination room, Tanya and Marcus sat under harsh lights. Nurses in protective gear worked around them in silence. Their clothes were cut away, their eyes flushed with sterile solution. Tanya's hands trembled as she gripped the chair, trying not to cry. Marcus stared blankly at the floor, whispering to himself. No one spoke the word, but it hung heavy in the air, HIV. Every second felt longer than a lifetime. Doctors assured them the risk was low, but not impossible. For the two healers who had dedicated their lives to saving others, that single night had rewritten their story. Now, every breath, every heartbeat came with a question: did it reach my bloodstream? There's a kind of silence that falls after an act like that. It isn't relief. It's the weight of something too awful to name. The hospital floor was shut down. Security sealed off the corridor. Word spread quickly, through the ER, the waiting rooms, the break areas. Some staff prayed quietly. Others wept. For those who worked alongside Tanya and Marcus, it was personal. They weren't just co-workers, they were family. That night, administrators contacted law enforcement. The official charge read, felony assault on emergency medical personnel. But to those who were there, it was more than a legal term. It was betrayal, something sacred had been broken. By midnight, officers had Cameron in custody. He was taken to a secure psychiatric ward for evaluation before transfer. The report would later note that he showed no visible remorse. But behind the paperwork, behind the sterile words of the law, lay two wounded lives waiting for test results that would decide everything. Hospitals are places where strangers become saviors, where compassion outweighs fear. But that night, compassion met its match. And as dawn broke over Raleigh, the people inside UNC Rex weren't just tired, they were changed. Emergency cleanup begins immediately. The air smells of bleach and fear. Blood stains the walls, the floor, even the nurse station phones. Plastic gloves are thrown into red bags. Towels soaked in crimson pile up faster than they can be replaced. The scene looks less like a hospital and more like a battlefield after an invisible war. The camera pans over the hallway, silent chaos. Security stands guard, keeping staff and patients away from room 317. Behind the glass, two lives tremble on the edge of a nightmare. Tanya Brooks and Marcus Lee are rushed to isolation, their scrubs clinging to them, streaked with another man's blood. Their hands shake uncontrollably as a nurse sprays antiseptic over their skin. Eyes dart everywhere, to the floor, to each other, to the memory of what just happened. For two people who dedicated their lives to saving others, tonight, they became patients, unwilling, terrified, and uncertain. Cut to the decontamination room. The cold light flickers. Tanya grips the edge of a steel table, tears mixing with the sterile rinse pouring down her face. She tries to stay calm, repeating silently that it will be fine, that protocols exist for moments like this. But deep down, she knows, there are no real protocols for fear. Not the kind that seeps under your skin and whispers, "What if?" Marcus sits nearby, pale and trembling. His voice cracks as he whispers to the attending physician. "Tell my mom I'm okay." Those 5 words carried the weight of everything unsaid, the fear of infection, the guilt of surviving, and the memory of a man who turned his pain into a weapon. The camera cuts briefly to Cameron Gilchrist, restrained on a stretcher, wrists tied down with leather straps. His eyes are glassy, unfocused. He mumbles words no one can make out. Orderlies stand nearby, their faces blank, uncertain if they should feel anger or pity. Cameron sits in silence, his breathing heavy, his eyes lost somewhere between confusion and detachment. He doesn't fight the restraints. He doesn't look at anyone. He just stares, at nothing. Maybe at everything. To him, the world is a blur of light, sound, and consequences he can't take back. The camera zooms in, his fingers twitch slightly, his jaw tightens. For a moment, he looks almost remorseful. Then blank again. Within an hour, the entire ER knows. Phones buzz in corners. Conversations stop when supervisors walk by. Fear spreads faster than the facts. Words like HIV exposure and contamination echo through sterile halls. No one says it out loud, but everyone is thinking the same thing: what if it were me? Footage of the hospital's conference room, administrators huddled, speaking in low tones. The hospital PR team drafts a statement. HR calls it an unfortunate patient behavioral incident. But for those who lived it, it was something else entirely. For Tanya and Marcus, hours stretch into eternity. Blood samples are drawn. Tests are sent to the lab. Doctors assure them that early intervention medications reduce the risk significantly, but science can't calm the storm inside the human heart. Waiting for results becomes its own kind of torture. Tanya lies on a gurney, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She clutches her cross necklace, a habit she developed during night shifts when exhaustion made faith feel like survival. She thinks about her daughter, the tuition she's been saving for, the mornings she promised she'd be there. Every beep of the heart monitor feels like time mocking her. For the first time in her career, she doesn't want to be in a hospital. She wants to go home. Cut to Marcus, sitting upright now, his face buried in his palms. Marcus replays the moment over and over, the flash of red, the scream, the metallic smell. He'd seen car wrecks, gunshot wounds, and trauma victims, but this was different. This was personal. He wasn't saving a patient. He was surviving one. The scene shifts, janitors scrub the floor outside room 317. A biohazard sign covers the door. Security stands post. Inside, Cameron remains motionless, eyes open, staring at the ceiling tiles. Some staff avoid even looking into the room. Others whisper that Cameron should have never been discharged from the halfway facility. That someone, somewhere, ignored the warning signs. But the truth is, no one saw it coming, not like this. Hospitals are built for physical healing, not for the kind of wounds that start in the mind. Soft piano fades in, low and mournful. The light in the hallway begins to dim as dawn approaches. As the night bleeds into morning, Raleigh wakes up to another ordinary Tuesday. But for those inside UNC Rex, nothing feels ordinary anymore. Tanya and Marcus are moved to observation, where they'll remain for 48 hours under protocol. Cameron is transferred to the psychiatric unit under guard. 3 lives, once bound by duty and care, now tangled in tragedy. The screen fades to the slow pulse of a heart monitor. Outside, the city moves on. Inside, 2 healers wait, not for a cure, but for peace of mind. The blood has been cleaned, the floors are spotless again, but fear doesn't wash off so easily. Cut to Tanya's face, silent, tired, staring out the window as sunlight breaks through the blinds. Behind every mask, every gown, every late-night emergency, there's a heart that beats, a life that risks everything for someone else's. But on this night, mercy met madness. And it left its mark. When the call came in, officers thought it was a routine disturbance, a patient acting out. But as Detective Avery Coleman stepped into the ER corridor, the smell of disinfectant mixed with blood told a different story. The scene was cold, clinical, but heavy with something invisible, disbelief. The camera pans across the hospital floor, yellow evidence markers dot the hallway. Technicians move with precision, photographing the 4 tubing, sealed blood-stained gloves, and fragments of a shattered tray. Every drop of blood was now evidence. What had once been an act of medical care was now a crime scene. Investigators wore double gloves, their eyes tracing the path of red that led from Cameron Gilchrist's bed to the corner where Tanya and Marcus had fallen. Detective Coleman stands quietly, taking notes. He interviews nurses, their voices low, shaky, replaying the horror they witnessed. Coleman had seen violence before, but never like this, not inside a hospital, not from a patient fighting for his life. His pen barely kept up with the contradictions, a man both victim and suspect, a scene both medical and criminal. Cameron sits in an isolation room, his wrists still restrained. Officers stand by as a psychiatrist attempts to question him. He mutters incoherently, his voice raspy. "They wanted to poison me first. I just stopped them. I had to stop them." His words were fractured, drifting between paranoia and pain. To some, it was madness. To others, it was guilt. Cut to a press conference outside the hospital. Reporters press microphones forward. The hospital's PR representative stands firm, face composed but voice cautious. "We're cooperating fully with authorities. Our focus remains the safety of our staff and patients." Behind those words, fear rippled through the system. The DA's office debated the unthinkable: could this be classified as felony assault using a biological weapon? If proven intentional, Cameron could face decades behind bars. But intent, in cases like this, is a slippery thing. Cut to footage of the district attorney, speaking to camera. "This is not a simple assault. The transmission of blood from an HIV-positive individual raises serious legal and ethical questions." But even as the DA built his argument, mental health experts pushed back. They described Cameron as deeply unstable, suffering from paranoia and untreated psychosis. They argued that what happened wasn't premeditated, it was a breakdown. The screen splits: on one side, lawyers review case files, on the other, Tanya and Marcus undergo follow-up testing, faces pale, haunted. The hospital found itself at the center of a storm, a place of healing now entangled in questions of law and responsibility. Was Cameron Gilchrist a danger to others, or a man abandoned by a system that failed him long before that night? Detective Coleman closes his notebook, his face unreadable. In the end, there were no clear villains, only victims of circumstance. Blood, law, and madness had collided, and no one walked away untouched. When the story broke, it spread faster than anyone expected. A hospital, a place built on compassion, had turned into the setting for a nightmare. What happened inside that room at UNC Rex was no longer just Cameron Gilchrist's story. It had become a mirror, reflecting something larger, something deeply broken in the system meant to protect those who heal. Cut to interviews with local residents standing outside the hospital, their faces reflecting disbelief. "My sister's a nurse here, and every night she goes in, we pray she comes back safe. It shouldn't be like that." In Raleigh, fear settled quietly between the walls of homes, emergency rooms, and clinics. The conversation turned from sympathy to survival. Nurses spoke about being threatened by patients. Doctors described verbal abuse that turned physical. Across America, healthcare workers were starting to ask the same question: how much compassion can a person give before it costs them their safety? The camera pans to Tanya Brooks, sitting by a dimly lit window. She stares outside, holding a cup of tea that's long gone cold. Tanya returned home, but rest never came easy. The sound of monitors haunted her dreams. Every shadow in the hallway reminded her of that night. Her children asked if she was okay, she smiled, but her hands still shook when she answered. Cut to Marcus, seen walking past the hospital from a distance, head down, avoiding eye contact with the building. Marcus couldn't bring himself to return to work. He'd spent years saving lives, but now the very sight of a hospital made his chest tighten. He told friends he needed time, maybe a new career, maybe a new city. Healing others had once given him purpose. Now, it only reminded him of fear. Montage of hospital staff gathered in a training room. Instructors demonstrate panic buttons, lockdown procedures, and self-defense moves. UNC Rex responded swiftly. New safety protocols were rolled out across every department, metal detectors at entrances, silent alarms installed in rooms, and mandatory training for all staff. But beneath the policies, a question lingered: could safety measures ever restore trust? Anonymous nurses appear on screen, their faces blurred, voices distorted for privacy. We love our patients. But now, when someone yells or pulls away, we flinch first. That's not who we used to be. It's not just fear of infection anymore, it's fear of people. And that's the hardest part. In the wake of the attack, the community's empathy collided with outrage. They wanted accountability, yes, but they also wanted answers. How did a man so unstable reach that breaking point unnoticed? And how many others were slipping through the same cracks? The screen fades to footage of a candlelight vigil held outside the hospital, nurses, doctors, and families standing in silence, candles flickering in the cool evening air. Trust was wounded that night, trust in patients, in hospitals, in the fragile bond between care and danger. For Raleigh, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call that healing itself had become hazardous. September 2023. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Cameron Gilchrist was led into Wake County Superior Court, shackled at the wrists, head lowered, his face expressionless. For the first time, the man whose blood had turned a hospital into a crime scene stood before the law. Cut to wide shot, the courtroom, sterile wood panels, cameras flashing. Tanya sits in the second row, hands clasped tight, her face pale but resolute. Marcus is absent, still recovering emotionally, his lawyer representing him instead. The charges were severe: 2 counts of felony assault on emergency personnel using a biological agent. The prosecutor's voice echoed across the courtroom, cold and unwavering. Each word landed heavy, like the sound of a gavel before the verdict. The defendant knowingly used his HIV-positive blood as a weapon. He acted with intent, endangering 2 innocent healthcare workers performing their duty to save his life. The camera lingers on Tanya's eyes, red-rimmed but steady. Across the room, Cameron sits unmoved, his lawyer whispering into his ear. His defense told a different story: a man broken by years of illness, isolation, and neglect. They claimed he wasn't fully aware of his actions that night, that fear and psychosis had blurred the line between defense and destruction. My client did not intend harm. He was in a mental health crisis, confused, and frightened. This was not malice, it was a moment of madness. The jury listens, their faces still, some glancing toward Tanya. The room feels suspended between compassion and outrage. The courtroom became more than a stage for judgment. It became a reflection of something deeper: how society decides who deserves punishment and who deserves understanding. The question wasn't just whether Cameron Gilchrist was guilty, but whether he understood what guilt meant. Cut to footage of the psychiatrist who had treated him before the attack. He had been showing signs of paranoia, delusions of being watched, and strong distrust toward medical staff. He believed people were trying to harm him. It's not an excuse, but it is part of the truth. The prosecutor pushed back, arguing that delusion or not, the attack had consequences that could last a lifetime. Tanya still took medication for post-exposure treatment. Marcus still battled anxiety in crowded places. Pain, unlike intent, leaves no room for interpretation. Camera pans across the spectators, nurses, hospital staff, families, all watching in silence. Tanya attended every hearing, never once looking directly at him. She said she wanted closure, not revenge, but closure can be cruel when it depends on the words of a judge. When the hearing ended, no verdict was given. The judge ordered a continued psychiatric evaluation, citing uncertainty over Gilchrist's mental state at the time of the offense. Justice, for now, was suspended, somewhere between compassion and consequence. In that quiet moment, the courtroom wasn't divided by guilt or innocence, but by the fragile distance between mercy and fear. Months passed. The chaos faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But inside UNC Rex Hospital, the memories didn't vanish, they lingered quietly, like a scar beneath the surface. Camera pans through a hospital corridor, nurses moving with purpose, laughter faintly echoing from a break room. Life, though changed, goes on. Tanya Brooks returned first. Not to the emergency unit where it all happened, but to a smaller ward, less noise, fewer night shifts. Her hands were steady again, her smile softer. Yet every time she put on her gloves, a faint chill reminded her how fragile safety can be. Tanya is shown adjusting a patient's foreline, her expression professional but distant. The camera lingers as she takes a quiet breath before touching the tubing. Her tests had come back negative. No trace of infection. The moment the doctor said the words, her knees gave out, and for the first time in months, she cried without fear. Relief washed through her, sharp, overwhelming, and yet incomplete. Because healing from fear isn't medical. It's emotional. Cut to Marcus, standing by an ambulance bay, now working in logistics, away from patient care but still within the hospital grounds. Marcus returned too, though to a different role. He no longer worked in direct contact with patients. Some called it a step down, but for him, it was survival. Every siren that passed still made his pulse race. Yet in quiet moments, he reminded himself, he was still helping people, just differently. The scene transitions to a news update, a brief mention of Cameron Gilchrist. Cameron Gilchrist remained under psychiatric care, declared unfit for trial. Doctors said he continued to show signs of delusion, alternating between remorse and confusion. He often asked about the people he'd hurt, as if his mind couldn't reconcile what he'd done with who he used to be. The screen fades to black and white photos, hospital workers holding hands during safety training, nurses sitting in counseling circles. This case became more than a headline about violence in healthcare. It became a mirror, showing the cost of compassion, the exhaustion behind every shift, and the invisible wounds that never make it into medical charts. Across America, nurses and doctors face burnout, fear, and fatigue. And still, they show up. Still, they heal. Cut to Tanya walking through the hospital garden, sunlight catching her face. She looks tired, but calm. Tanya once said in an interview, "I still believe in healing. Even when it hurts." It was a simple statement, but it captured the truth that outlived the tragedy, that empathy, even scarred, refuses to die. Soft piano music rises. The hospital lights dim as the final line fades in over archival footage of nurses and doctors working through the night. No one forgets what it feels like to face danger in a place built for hope. But it's that same hope, fragile, human, relentless, that keeps the people who heal from giving up. Night returns to the same halls where it all began. Different patients. Different faces. But the same heartbeat of duty, compassion, and quiet endurance. The same invisible tension that comes with caring for strangers, not knowing which moment will test your faith in the very thing you serve. Camera pans past patient rooms, soft whispers, a cough, a faint laugh from a nurse's station. The ordinary beauty of life continuing after chaos. For Tanya, each day now begins with prayer. Not for strength alone, but for peace. She knows the danger will always exist, the unpredictable mix of pain, pressure, and human emotion that can turn healing spaces into battlefields. Yet she walks these corridors again, not because she forgot, but because she refuses to surrender to fear. Tanya is seen placing a blanket over an elderly patient, her movements gentle, deliberate. The camera lingers on her eyes, tired, wiser, but still kind. Marcus works behind the scenes now, ensuring supplies reach every ward. He says it feels strange to be away from patients, but necessary. "You can't pour from an empty cup," he told a reporter once. He meant it. Healing others, he learned, begins with protecting yourself, something few in his profession are ever taught. The screen shifts to a dimly lit hospital boardroom. A small group of staff sit in a training session on workplace safety. Posters read, "De-escalation saves lives," and "Mental health matters." Since the incident, hospitals across the region have begun reviewing security protocols. Panic buttons were installed, staff given new training, and mental health counseling became more accessible. Yet, beneath the policy updates and press statements, the deeper question remains, one no form or funding can easily solve. Camera fades to the empty ER entrance at dawn. The automatic doors slide open, then close again, as if breathing. In a world where the selfless face harm for caring, how do we protect the people who protect us? How do we guard the ones who step into pain, every day, with nothing but compassion as their shield? Footage rolls of real nurses laughing together in break rooms, crying in stairwells, holding hands after long shifts. Then, silent shots of candles lit outside the hospital in remembrance of victims of workplace violence. The answer may not lie in laws or walls, nor in metal detectors or locked doors. It may lie somewhere deeper, in how we see those who serve, in how we listen when they say they are tired, and in how we value the hearts that keep beating even after they've been broken. Music fades to a single piano note. The lights in the hospital corridor dim, leaving one lamp glowing at the nurse's station. Because behind every act of mercy, and every act of madness, there is still a human heart, fragile, fierce, and deserving of protection.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.